Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves standing in the Ural Mountains of Russia, in the hard industrial city of Ekaterinburg, the summer air of July 1918, pressing heavy and still against the wooden houses and iron workshops that crowd its muddy streets. It is a place of smoke and sawdust, of clattering cartwheels and boots that never seem to dry. Behind one freshly whitewashed fence, so tall and forbidding that neighbors whisper about it, sits a house with shuttered windows. It is called the Ipatiev house, though most now mutter another name under their breath, the house of special purpose. Inside, in a cramped series of rooms guarded by rifles and bayonets, the last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, lives out his final weeks with his wife Alexandra, their 5 children, and a handful of loyal servants. The world outside has long since declared them irrelevant, relics of a fallen age. Inside, the clocks tick with the kind of slow cruelty that only prisoners understand. The date is July 1918, and Russia is torn apart by civil war. The Bolsheviks, barely a year into power, are fighting desperately to hold the country against the advancing white armies and foreign intervention. And here in this isolated city beyond the Ural frontier, they guard the imperial family like a poisonous treasure too dangerous to release, too controversial to put on public trial, too symbolic to let fall into enemy hands. You step onto the muddy yard, smell the sour stench of horses from the nearby stables, and hear the creak of boots as guards patrol, muttering in Russian, their bayonets glinting dully in the pale summer sun. If you're hoping to stroll right up and knock on the door, you probably won't survive this. The Bolsheviks don't exactly do casual visits with tea and biscuits. Still, tonight we're going inside. We're going to sit quietly in the corners of their rooms, listen to their whispers, and see what it meant to be the last Romanovs, confined and waiting in Ekaterinburg. This is the Last Romanovs. July. If you're curious about how empires die, about how history squeezes out the final moments of dynasties with no ceremony at all, you're in the right place. Before we slip further, let me ask, drop in the comments your location and your local time. Think of it as sending a signal light across the centuries to the Romanovs themselves. Who knows, maybe they'd smile to know people far away still whisper about them. And when you're ready to drift off, close your eyes and let the quiet voices of this story carry you. After all, in this house of high fences and locked doors, the night never truly ends. Now, let's step past the fence. The Ipatiev house had been chosen carefully. It was the residence of a local engineer, commandeered by Bolshevik authorities early in 1918, because it was large enough to contain the family, yet modest enough to be guarded tightly. Its tall fence was raised even higher once the Romanovs arrived in May. New planks shut out every view from the street. Curtains were drawn, windows were nailed shut. Neighbors soon learned to walk briskly past, pretending not to notice the armed sentries posted at every corner. The once ordinary house now felt more like a fortress disguised in wood. Inside, the Romanovs had been reduced from rulers to captives. Nicholas II, the man who once signed decrees for millions, now rose early to sweep floors. He wore a soldier's tunic, stripped of insignia, his beard trimmed shorter than the imperial portraits once showed. Alexandra, frail and often in pain from sciatica, spent long hours reading religious texts, her German accent a constant source of suspicion among guards. Their children, 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, and their son Alexei, the frail heir with hemophilia, shared 2 small bedrooms upstairs. The air was stifling in summer, heavy with the smell of laundry drying on makeshift lines, kerosene lamps, and the faint, sickly sweetness of medicines prepared for Alexei's bleeding joints. The guards allowed no letters, no newspapers except carefully censored ones, no visitors. Even food deliveries were monitored, portions cut down deliberately to remind them of their fallen status. Breakfasts of black bread, porridge and weak tea replaced the banquets of imperial days. If sugar appeared at all, it was rationed out crumb by crumb. The children learned to be grateful for boiled potatoes. In a corner, the loyal cook, Ivan Karatanov, whispered apologies for every thin soup he placed on the table. You might imagine royal children stamping their feet and demanding cream pastries. Nope, not here. They had been raised with a kind of Spartan simplicity, and now, under lock and key, they endured their meals with quiet dignity. But dignity could not mask despair. The family had been shuttled from house arrest in Tobolsk to this harsher confinement in Ekaterinburg. Each transfer tightened the noose. Their guards here were harsher, less differential, many openly hostile. At night, the Romanovs sometimes heard drunken voices outside their door, guards cursing the Tsar and laughing crudely about his daughters. The family clung to ritual, evening prayers, embroidery circles, diary writing. Nicholas still kept a meticulous diary, jotting down entries about the weather, the meals, the small tasks he did in the garden. They read like echoes of his reign, precise, dutiful, almost oblivious to the storm building around them. Meanwhile, outside the Apatia fence, Ekaterinburg seethed with revolutionary fervor. The city had become a stronghold of the Bolsheviks in the Urals, filled with Red Guards, local Soviets, and propaganda slogans plastered on every factory wall. For ordinary workers, the sight of the Tsar, locked away, was proof that the old world was truly gone. But for monarchists, especially those in the advancing White Army, the presence of Nicholas and his family was a burning beacon. Rescue them, and perhaps the empire could be revived. This tension weighed heavily on their captors. The Romanovs were not just prisoners, they were bargaining chips, liabilities and symbols all at once. You might picture Nicholas pacing the cramped sitting room, hearing the distant rattle of gunfire from the Civil War front lines, wondering if his loyalists might yet burst through the door. But each day that hope grew dimmer, Ekaterinburg was far communications patchy, rumors contradictory. Some guards whispered that the Germans wanted to exchange the Romanovs for political prisoners. Others muttered that the British Navy might arrive. Nicholas's children clung to such scraps, but the adults knew better. The Bolsheviks were unlikely to let their enemies reclaim the family alive. Still, life in confinement took on routines. Every morning the family was escorted briefly into the small fenced yard, watched closely by rifles as they walked in circles for exercise. Alexei, often too weak to walk, was carried by his sisters or by Nicholas himself. Guards noted the pitiful sight of the former Tsar lifting his fragile son across the yard. Once back inside, the daughters embroidered, played the piano or sewed clothing. Alexandra taught lessons in French and history. Though even the children sometimes rolled their eyes, homeschooling isn't fun even when you're royal. The family prayed together at length, their orthodox faith both solace and chain. For the guards, however, the Romanovs were both burden and entertainment. Some treated them with grudging respect, remembering their own military service under Nicholas. Others mocked them cruelly, rifling through their belongings or sneering at their prayers. Stories later recalled guards carving graffiti into walls, shouting, "Down with the Tsar," within earshot. The commandant at first was Alexander Avdiyev, whose sloppiness and drunkenness made discipline difficult. He was soon replaced by Yakov Yurovsky, a sterner figure who would eventually oversee the family's fate. By July 1918, the situation was worsening. The White Army advanced from Siberia, threatening to reach Ekaterinburg. The local Bolsheviks grew increasingly anxious. They feared that if the Whites captured the city, the Romanovs would be liberated, becoming a rallying point. Already, monarchist officers dreamed of hoisting Nicholas back onto a throne, or at least using him as a figurehead. In the revolutionary calculus, the Tsar alive was far more dangerous than the Tsar dead, but for the moment, official orders kept him confined, not executed. This uncertainty added to the oppressive tension inside the Apatiev house. You might imagine the Romanovs trying to mark time with small celebrations. In June, Olga turned 23. The family shared what little cake could be scrounged, singing softly under the watch of guards who smirked at the sight. Anastasia, only 17, tried to lighten moods with jokes, pulling faces or hiding keys to amuse her siblings. Tatiana, more serious, helped manage household chores. Maria struck up occasional conversations with guards, her warmth briefly disarming even hardened revolutionaries. Yet even these sparks of humanity could not mask the sense that they were ghosts already, lingering in borrowed rooms. At night, the family listened. The city outside never slept. Trains shrieking through the station, shouts in the street, gunshots echoing from distant barracks. Alexandra wrote in her diary about the constant noise, the drunken singing of guards, the uncertainty of each new day. Nicholas noted small acts, tending a garden plot, mending clothes, brief walks. They did not write openly of fear, but you, standing unseen in the corner, can sense it in the way their voices lower when footsteps pass outside, the way Alexandra clutches her son's hand, the way Nicholas gazes too long at the locked door. By the first days of July, whispers spread that their time was short. The White Army pushed closer. Newspapers hinted at looming decisions. Guards became stricter. Conversations stopped abruptly when the family entered a room. Even the children noticed. Alexei asked if they would be moved again, as they had from Tobolsk. His parents murmured reassurances, but their faces betrayed no certainty. The Ipatiev house was no longer a prison of waiting. It was becoming a place of finality. And so, in these weeks of confinement, the Romanovs lived in a strange twilight, stripped of crowns yet still a family, prisoners yet not yet condemned, clinging to rituals while history sharpened its blade just outside the fence. They could not see beyond the planks, but the world had already decided their fate. The house you have stepped into is silent at first, though the silence is not natural. It is forced, like a lid pressed down on a boiling pot. Life inside the Ipatiev house follows patterns shaped less by choice than by the constant rhythm of commands shouted by guards and the endless thump of boots outside their doors. For the Romanovs, days have become indistinguishable, like pages in a diary that all carry the same entry, still here. And yet, within those narrow walls, every detail, the scrape of a spoon in a bowl, the creak of a stair, the quick glance exchanged at the sound of a latch turning carries weight. The rooms are cramped. You expect royal chambers filled with chandeliers and brocade curtains, but what you see instead are bare walls, simple iron beds, and plain wooden chairs. The drawing room, once decorated with fine furniture, now serves as a common sitting area. A battered piano squats in the corner, its notes slightly off key, though Tatiana plays on it to pass the time. Upstairs, 2 small bedrooms are crammed with the daughters' cots, each neatly made embroidery projects folded at the foot. Alexei's bed is placed close to his mother's, so she can rush to him at night, when pain seizes his joints. Daily life is organized around strict schedules, dictated by the guards. At 7 each morning, the family is awakened by knocks at the door, followed by the clink of keys and the rattle of locks. Breakfast arrives, usually thin porridge, black bread and weak tea. Sometimes the cook manages to slip in a bit of jam or an egg, but luxuries are rare. Nicholas insists that everyone eats together at the long table in the dining room, the clatter of spoons echoing off bare plaster walls. Even in captivity, he maintains the discipline of family meals, perhaps because it is one of the last dignities he can cling to. After breakfast, the family is usually escorted into the yard. The guards, rifles slung, watch them walk in slow circles. The yard is small, ringed with the same high fence that blocks every view of the street. A few young birch trees cast thin shade, and Nicholas often tends a small garden plot there, pulling weeds with calloused fingers. His daughters trail behind, sometimes chatting in French or English to keep their words private from the guards. Alexei, pale and weak, must often be carried or pulled in a wheelchair improvised from a garden chair. His sisters take turns wheeling him, trying to make the outing feel like a game. You watch them pace, step after step, the monotony heavy but strangely steadying, like the pendulum of a clock that will not stop until someone smashes it. When they return inside, the house settles into its midday rhythm. The daughters embroider or mend clothing. Tatiana, serious and practical, organizes sewing projects, her long fingers moving deftly over fabric. Olga, the eldest, spends hours reading novels or religious texts, her mood often somber, her eyes shadowed by worry. Maria, warm-hearted, chats with guards if they seem approachable, trying to bridge the gap between prisoner and captive. Anastasia, irrepressible at 17, makes faces, hides objects, and tells jokes to lighten the mood. Her antics sometimes win a smile even from Nicholas, though Alexandra scolds gently, reminding her youngest daughter that dignity must be maintained. Alexandra herself spends much of her time in bed, suffering from headaches, heart troubles, and chronic pain. She writes long letters, though most will never be sent, filled with prayers and exhortations to patience. She clings fiercely to her faith, leading the family in evening prayers that stretch for an hour or more, candles flickering on the icon corner. For her, orthodoxy is a fortress against despair. Nicholas, though less mystical, respects the ritual, bowing his head and crossing himself with quiet precision. The children join in too, voices rising and falling in old liturgical cadences. If you close your eyes, you could almost imagine you are in a church, but then a guard coughs outside, the illusion breaks, and you remember that this altar stands inside a prison. Lunch is little different from breakfast. Soup thin as water, black bread, sometimes potatoes. The cook, loyal but helpless, apologizes under his breath when dishes are meager. Once Anastasia joked that the soup must have been made by waving a carrot over hot water. Even Nicholas chuckled, though the joke carried the sting of truth. They eat slowly, voices hushed. Gone are the long imperial banquets where crystal clinked and orchestras played. Here a dropped spoon makes the whole table glance up. Afternoons stretch endlessly. To pass time, Nicholas reads aloud from history books or adventure novels. Sometimes the girls stage small plays, improvising costumes from scraps. On better days, they play cards or board games, though arguments flare quickly in such close quarters. Anastasia, impatient, cheats shamelessly. Tatiana scolds, Maria tries to smooth things over. Alexei listens, pale but smiling when his pain allows. Nicholas keeps a diary, his entries precise. Walked in garden, weather warm, ate soup. The monotony is both comfort and cruelty. It makes days survivable, but it also erases them, leaving behind only a blur. Evenings bring the only hint of relaxation. After dinner, they sing hymns or folk songs, voices mingling softly, sometimes even harmonizing. The guards, listening from the hall, are occasionally moved, though they rarely admit it. Later they kneel before their icons, murmuring prayers until candles sputter out. Then comes the worst moment, the locks clanging into place, the heavy footsteps retreating down the corridor. Night closes in, bringing no peace. The daughters share whispered conversations, imagining futures they will never see. Nicholas lies awake, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts circling like wolves around the same unanswerable question. Will they survive this? The physical restrictions are harsh, but the psychological ones weigh heavier. The family is not allowed to look out of windows, curtains are nailed shut. They cannot speak with neighbors, cannot send letters freely, cannot receive real news of the world. Information arrives only in fragments, filtered through guards. The White Army, they hear, is advancing. German diplomats may intervene. Lenin may decide to put Nicholas on trial. Every rumor is dissected, every possibility entertained, yet in their hearts, they know that their lives hang by a thread thinner than any embroidery stitch. And what of the guards? Their presence is constant. They patrol the hallways, smoke in corners, laugh crudely within earshot. Some are rough peasants, hardened by war and revolution. Others are barely more than boys, awkward in their uniforms, embarrassed when the Grand Duchesses meet their eyes. Nicholas greets them politely, habitually, as if they were still his subjects. Some appreciate it, others resent it, mocking him behind his back. The daughters notice too. Maria, warm and curious, sometimes exchanges small talk with friendlier guards, asking about their families. Her openness startles them. She is supposed to be an enemy, a symbol of oppression, yet she smiles at them as if they were simply men in need of kindness. These brief exchanges hint at humanity on both sides, though always shadowed by suspicion. The commandant, Yakov Yurovsky, maintains stricter discipline than his predecessor. He insists on order, on clear rules. No fraternization, no indulgence. He keeps watch not only on the Romanovs, but also on his own guards, many of whom dislike the boring duty of standing over a fallen family. Some drink too much. Some slack off. Yurovsky's sternness keeps them in line for now. To the Romanovs, he appears cold, efficient, never cruel for its own sake, but never friendly. When he enters a room, conversation dies. He notes everything, how long they pray, what they eat, even the tone of their voices. And so, life inside the Apatiev house is a paradox. On the surface, nothing happens. Days repeat in an endless loop of meals, prayers, and short walks. Yet beneath the monotony lies constant tension, the unspoken knowledge that every step, every word, is measured against fate. The Romanovs try to preserve a semblance of family life, but captivity seeps into everything. Even their laughter has a brittle edge, their smiles a flicker that vanishes quickly. You can feel it in the air, a stillness that is not calm but waiting. It is this very waiting that defines them. They are not free, but they are not yet condemned. They exist in a narrow corridor of time, walled in by fences and guards, pacing endlessly between meals and prayers, between whispered hopes and gnawing fears. And in that corridor, the last imperial family of Russia continues their life, day after day, in a house that has become both cage and tomb. The silence of the Apatiev house, heavy as it is, does not mean the outside world has forgotten. Beyond those shuttered windows, debates rage in smoky rooms filled with men whose boots and rifles gave them power. Local Bolsheviks, Red Guards, and members of the Ural Regional Soviet constantly argue over what to do with the prisoners in their care. You might imagine that the Tsar's fate was neatly signed off in Moscow from day one, but the truth is far messier. In Ekaterinburg, emotions are raw, loyalties uncertain, and the family's very presence sparks arguments that teeter between politics and personal hatred. The city is a hotbed of revolutionary zeal. Ekaterinburg has long been a workers' town, steeped in iron foundries and mines, and many of its revolutionaries see themselves as the purest defenders of the October Revolution. They are not interested in half measures or compromises. They want to smash every vestige of the old order. And what better symbol of that order than Nicholas II himself? The Romanovs in their midst are like a glowing ember buried in ash. One shift of wind and it might reignite a blaze of monarchy. That thought makes the local Bolsheviks nervous, even panic. Within the Ural Regional Soviet, meetings about the Romanovs stretch late into the night. One faction argues that they should be put on a formal trial, a spectacle of justice that would allow the revolution to prove its legitimacy. Another faction scoffs. A trial takes time, resources, and risk. What if white forces arrive mid-proceeding? What if foreign embassies make demands? Better, some argue, to end the matter swiftly and quietly. Still others suggest transferring the family farther east, perhaps deeper into Siberia, away from the White Army's advance. Each option carries dangers. The Red Guards, young and often brutal, lean toward harsher measures. Many of them grew up under hardship, some with fathers killed in the Tsar's wars, others with families impoverished while aristocrats feasted. Guarding the Romanovs feels to them like standing watch over a hated ghost. They mutter among themselves, telling stories of how Nicholas supposedly signed orders that killed thousands of peasants. Some of their bitterness is real, some is revolutionary myth. Either way, it fuels their hostility. When they look at the family, they see not human beings but the living embodiment of centuries of oppression. And yet not every guard shares that view. A few, especially those who once served in the Imperial Army, feel a twinge of sympathy. They remember Nicholas visiting the front lines during the war, shaking soldiers' hands, listening clumsily but sincerely. They look at his daughters, barefoot sometimes in the yard, giggling at private jokes, and wonder what crime these young women could possibly have committed. The guards whisper about Maria's friendliness, Anastasia's antics, Tatiana's quiet dignity. These flickers of empathy cause tension. Bolshevik leaders warn their men not to fraternize, not to let themselves be swayed. Suspicion grows inside the house as much as outside. At the higher levels of the Ural Soviet, the tone is harder. Men like Philip Goloshyokhin, a committed revolutionary, argue fiercely that the Romanovs are a threat to the revolution's survival. He reminds colleagues that monarchist forces are closing in. Do you want them marching into Ekaterinburg with Nicholas at their head? He snaps at doubters. Others nod grimly. In this climate of war, mercy feels like weakness. Still, the decision is not entirely theirs. Moscow looms over every debate. Lenin and the Central Soviet government technically hold the authority to decide the family's fate, but communication is slow, telegrams unreliable, and Moscow is itself embroiled in war councils, food shortages, and political battles. Local leaders in Ekaterinburg sense that history may leave the choice to them. If the White Army reaches the city, there will be no time for permission slips. They must decide now what to do. Meanwhile, propaganda swirls. Newspapers across the city publish editorials denouncing Nicholas as a bloody tyrant. Pamphlets circulate describing the Tsar as a criminal who starved the people, executed workers, and betrayed Russia in the war. These exaggerations mix with truth, producing an image of Nicholas as a monster. For ordinary workers who never saw him up close, it's easy to accept. For those who now guard him daily, the contrast is jarring. The papers describe a tyrant, but they see a weary, polite man reading books to his daughters. The gap between propaganda and reality feeds unease. The debates are not confined to politics. On the ground, practical issues nag at commanders. Guard duty is exhausting, morale is low, and resources are stretched. Keeping the Romanovs alive requires food, medicine, and manpower that might otherwise go to the war front. Some Bolsheviks complain openly. Why should we waste bread on them when workers are starving? The family's mere survival feels like a luxury that the revolution cannot afford. As the White Army advances, urgency sharpens. Reports trickle in. Monarchist forces have taken this town, then that one. Railway lines are contested. Ekaterinburg's days as a Bolshevik stronghold may be numbered. In smoky council rooms, Bolshevik leaders drum their fists on tables demanding action. To delay is to invite disaster. If Nicholas falls into white hands, he becomes a rallying banner for counter-revolution. If Alexandra and the children survive, monarchists may still claim legitimacy. Every hour the family lives, the risk grows. For the Romanovs inside, these debates are invisible, but not unfelt. They sense the guards' tension, the way conversations stop when they approach, the harder stares that follow their every move. Nicholas writes in his diary about strange moods among the men. Alexandra whispers to her daughters that they must remain strong. The children try to laugh, but even Anastasia's jokes fall flat. The air inside the Ekaterinburg house thickens, like a storm that hasn't yet broken, but promises lightning soon. At the heart of it all is fear. Fear among Bolsheviks that the revolution will collapse if the Romanovs are freed. Fear among guards that they will be blamed if anything happens to the family. Fear among the family that each day could be their last. The Ekaterinburg house becomes less a residence and more a crucible, pressure building with every rumour from the front. Occasionally, the debates spill into action. The family's movements are restricted further. Windows that had been left cracked are nailed shut completely. Guards grow stricter, cutting back on small allowances. The daughters are scolded for speaking foreign languages where guards cannot understand. Nicholas is told not to keep written notes where they might be read. The already narrow circle of freedom shrinks even tighter. You can almost hear the echo of boots on staircases during these tense nights. Guards summoned for yet another meeting. Some of them return pale, others more defiant. They have argued again about what to do, and though the decision is not yet announced, the atmosphere makes it clear something is coming. This tension isn't merely political, it is personal. Many Bolsheviks feel genuine hatred for Nicholas. They remember Bloody Sunday in 1905, when peaceful protesters were gunned down. They blame him for Russia's humiliations in the war, for famine, for the deaths of millions. Some spit the word Nicholas like a curse. For them, killing him would be justice, not just necessity. For others, the family complicates matters. Young daughters, a sickly boy, innocence, some say caught in history's jaws. Even hardened revolutionaries wrestle with this contradiction. Still, the tide leans one way. As July deepens and the White Army creeps closer, voices calling for elimination grow louder. The logic of war devours hesitation. The local Bolsheviks are determined not to hand their enemies a symbol. Better no Tsar at all, one mutters, than a Tsar in white hands. Inside the Ekaterinburg house, the family kneels at prayer, their candles flickering, their whispers rising like incense. They do not know the exact words being spoken in council chambers across town, but they can feel the weight of those words pressing in on their walls. Every decision taken by the men in those meetings drips down into the silence of these rooms, shaping their final days. And so, while the Romanovs stitch embroidery and sip weak tea, Ekaterinburg's Bolsheviks wrestle with their consciences and their fears. Each side of the argument knows that history will judge them. Each knows that delay may doom them. And each knows, deep down, that the fate of a fallen dynasty is about to be sealed, not with ceremony, not with trial, but with the blunt tools of revolution. Civil war does not politely knock on the door. It crashes closer like thunder rolling over hills, shaking windows before you even see the lightning. By early July 1918, the storm of Russia's civil war was bearing down on Ekaterinburg. The White Army, the collection of monarchists, anti-Bolshevik officers, and Czechoslovak Legion fighters, was pushing through Siberia toward the Urals. In Moscow, Lenin's government scrambled to hold fronts across a collapsing empire. But in Ekaterinburg, the urgency was sharper, because the closer the Whites came, the more dangerous the Romanovs became. You step into the streets outside the Ekaterinburg house. The summer air is thick with dust and smoke. Telegraph poles carry wires humming with frantic messages, most of them half-false rumors or desperate calls for reinforcements. In taverns, workers argue heatedly over the latest news. Some cheer that the Whites are collapsing. Others whisper that they're marching swiftly westward. Soldiers stomp through with rifles slung over their shoulders, muttering that the Tsar is a prize the Whites would give their right arm to reclaim. The city feels like a drum stretched too tight, ready to split. Reports flow in. The Czechoslovak Legion has seized towns along the Trans-Siberian Railway. Their control of key stretches of track threatens Bolshevik supply lines. White detachments, reinforced by local peasants resentful of grain requisitions, are advancing. In Moscow, officials know the strategic danger, but here in Ekaterinburg, another thought dominates. If the Whites reach us, they will liberate the Romanovs, and if they liberate the Romanovs, they may try to restore the monarchy. To Bolshevik minds, the idea is not merely symbolic. Monarchists could hoist Nicholas, or even his fragile son, Alexei, onto a banner as the rightful ruler, rallying thousands who still believed in the old order. Even foreign governments weary of Bolshevism might recognize such a claim. The revolution, so precarious already, could unravel in days. For revolutionaries, this is not paranoia, but a political calculation. Nicholas alive equals danger. Nicholas in white hands equals disaster. The Romanovs inside are not ignorant of these movements. Guards, careless or talkative, mention towns falling to the Whites. Nicholas, ever the diarist, notes rumors in his small, neat handwriting. Alexandra, her nerves fraying, warns her daughters that the enemies of Russia are approaching. But she does not mean the Whites. She means the Bolsheviks. She still hopes, absurdly perhaps, that loyalists or Germans will intervene. The daughters cling to scraps of gossip, imagining a daring rescue, a cavalry charge into the city, their return to freedom. You can almost picture them whispering at night, "What if they come tomorrow?" But each morning the locks clang shut, and no rescue appears. For the Bolsheviks, the pressure is unbearable. The Ural Regional Soviet holds meeting after meeting. The arguments grow shorter now, harsher. Some still speak of transferring the family deeper east, perhaps to Perm or Omsk, but with railway lines disrupted, that option becomes riskier by the hour. The Whites could intercept the train, freeing the family and parading them as a restored dynasty. "We will not play courier for monarchists," one delegate snaps. Another argues that a public trial would expose the Tsar's crimes. "A trial takes months," comes the reply. "We have days." The civil war closes off options like doors slamming shut in a corridor. Meanwhile, the Whites are not idle. Monarchist officers dream of rescue operations. Leaflets circulate, urging soldiers to fight for the Tsar and Holy Russia. The Czechoslovak Legion, originally fighting for their own independence from Austria-Hungary, now finds itself drawn into this Russian struggle, inadvertently helping the monarchist cause simply by pushing the Bolsheviks back. The closer they march, the more frantic Ekaterinburg's Bolsheviks become. Inside the Apatiev house, the family's world grows smaller still. Guards tighten rules, shorten yard walks, and reduce privileges. Rumors swirl among the soldiers on duty. The Whites are within a week's march, within days, within hours. Each rumor makes the Romanovs' hearts pound with hope. Nicholas listens calmly, but Alexandra clasps her hands in prayer, whispering about deliverance. Anastasia, excitable, teases her sisters that soon they'll be free. Tatiana, serious, hushes her. Even Alexei brightens, imagining a world beyond the fences. But the guard's tightened grip tells another story. Deliverance is not what the Bolsheviks are planning. Civil war sharpens cruelty. Soldiers in the city mutter about the Romanovs wasting bread, while workers starve. Pamphlets call Nicholas the executioner of the people. Crowds cheer speeches about smashing monarchy forever, yet there is also fear. Many Bolsheviks know that if the Whites take the city, any guard who harmed the Tsar could face vengeance. They live in the shadow of both possible futures, punished by Whites for cruelty, punished by Reds for weakness. That fear breeds bitterness. As days slip by, clashes grow closer. You hear distant gunfire sometimes at night, echoing faintly like thunder. The Romanovs pause mid-prayer when the cracks reach their ears. Are those the Whites? Are they coming? The guards quickly hush such thoughts, but the tension is impossible to hide. Nicholas notes artillery fire faintly in the distance in his diary, as calm as if writing about weather. It is a strange stoicism, perhaps denial, perhaps acceptance. The Bolsheviks grow more deliberate. Yakov Yurovsky, now commandant of the house, inspects the premises more often, pacing with hard eyes. He talks less to the family and more to his guards, drilling them in discipline. He checks the basement, measures rooms, takes notes. To a casual observer, it looks like management. To anyone looking closely, it looks like preparation. By mid-July, the Whites are reported only miles away. Panic grips the Ural Soviet. Telegrams flash back and forth to Moscow. What should we do with Nicholas and his family? Moscow's replies are vague, cagey. Lenin and Sverdlov may be deliberately leaving the matter in local hands, or perhaps communication is simply too slow. Either way, the silence is interpreted as permission. Local Bolsheviks feel the decision is theirs to make, and so the calculus of war hardens into certainty. The Whites are too close. Transfer is impossible. A trial is impractical. What remains is final. In whispered rooms, decisions are made that will never be formally recorded, only remembered in fragments of testimony. The Romanovs cannot leave Ekaterinburg alive. Inside the house, the family senses change but cannot name it. The guards are harsher, the air heavier, the mood darker. Yet hope clings stubbornly. Perhaps tomorrow the Whites will break through. Perhaps tonight a loyalist band will storm the fence. But as the storm of civil war pounds closer, those hopes become less like lifelines and more like illusions. Step outside into the city once more. The streets are filled with soldiers digging trenches, hammering barricades, shouting orders. Children peer nervously from doorways. Church bells ring, not in celebration but in alarm. Ekaterinburg feels like a fortress under siege, and at the heart of that fortress, behind planks and rifles, sits a family who once ruled Russia, now reduced to pieces on a chessboard. And as the Whites advance, the hand of the revolution hovers over them, ready to sweep them off the board entirely. Yakov Yurovsky arrives at the Apatiev house on July 4th, 1918, and from the moment he crosses the threshold, the air shifts. Where his predecessor, Alexander Avdeev, had been lax and often drunk, Yurovsky is methodical, sober, and precise. His glasses glint in the dim light, his posture rigid, his voice measured. To the guards, he is not a comrade to share vodka with, but a commander who counts bullets, inspects rifles, and notes infractions. To the Romanovs, he is a wall, polite, restrained, but utterly impassive. If Avdeev was a nuisance, Yurovsky is a shadow of inevitability. He has been chosen deliberately. The Ural Regional Soviet wants someone reliable, someone who will not falter if a decision must be made swiftly. Yurovsky has a reputation, disciplined, politically committed, and loyal to the Bolshevik cause. He has worked in various revolutionary activities for years, endured exile, and proven himself as both organizer and enforcer. In him, local leaders believe they have found the man who can manage the special purpose of this house with discretion. From his first days, he inspects everything. He studies the layout of the building, narrow staircases, cramped rooms, the basement with its low ceiling and whitewashed walls. He measures distances, takes notes on where guards are stationed, where doors lock, where windows might be breached. He inventories weapons and ammunition. He makes lists of guard shifts, double-checks discipline, and warns that any guard caught fraternizing with the prisoners will face consequences. The Romanovs, who had grown used to small kindnesses from Avdeev's men, now find the atmosphere colder, more severe. Nicholas greets Yurovsky politely when they meet. The former Tsar, ever formal, bows slightly and addresses him with courtesy. Yurovsky responds with clipped nods, his eyes steady but unreadable. Alexandra, from her sickbed, peers at him with suspicion. whispering later to her daughters that this new commandant is not like the others. The children sense it too. Anastasia remarks that he is stern. Tatiana notes that he seems unmoved by kindness. Even the servants, accustomed to reading the moods of captors, whisper that this man has come not just to guard, but to finish something. One of Yurovsky's first changes is to the guard rotation. He replaces several of the local Red Guards with men more reliable, more tightly tied to Bolshevik discipline. Some of the old guards had grown too familiar with the prisoners, exchanging words or even smiles with the daughters. Yurovsky sees danger in that. He brings in Latvians and Hungarians, foreigners with little sentimental tie to the Romanovs, men hardened by war and loyal to the revolution alone. The mood in the corridors shifts from sloppy boredom to rigid vigilance. The family notices, gone are the half smiles, the casual remarks, the brief cracks of humanity. Now the guards are silent, professional, their rifles held a little tighter. He also tightens restrictions inside the house. Yard walks grow shorter, conversations with guards dwindle, and any attempt to look out of the nailed windows is punished. The family is no longer permitted to ring for attendance freely. Guards must now be present at every interaction. Even meals feel different. Yurovsky orders that all food deliveries be checked and reduced. Bread is rationed more severely, sugar nearly vanishes, and meat becomes rare. The meals, already meager, shrink further. The message is clear: you are prisoners, not guests. Yurovsky also watches the family closely, studying their habits. He notes that Nicholas tends to his small garden with patience, that Alexandra spends long hours praying, that the daughters gather around the piano. He observes Alexei's weakness, his need for assistance. Nothing escapes his attention. To the Romanovs, he gives little away, though occasionally he speaks in a quiet, almost courteous tone. But behind those glasses, his mind is not on their comfort. It is on orders, both those already received and those yet to come. For the Bolsheviks, his arrival signals a turning point. Until now, the Romanovs' captivity had been marked by uncertainty, managed by local commanders with little discipline. Now, with Yurovsky, the house becomes a machine, each guard a cog, each rule a gear. He insists on reports, on records of movements, on clear accountability. In later years, his meticulous notes will provide one of the clearest accounts of these final weeks. But in July 1918, they serve another purpose: preparation. The family notices the shift in atmosphere. Nicholas writes tersely in his diary that new commandant has taken over, seems stricter. Alexandra whispers to her daughters that this change bodes ill. Olga, sensitive to moods, feels a heaviness she cannot shake. Anastasia tries to make light of it, pulling faces behind Yurovsky's back, though her sisters hush her quickly. Even the servants remark that the house feels more like a prison now than ever before. The sense of foreboding grows. Yurovsky, meanwhile, corresponds with his superiors. He receives instructions about discipline, about ensuring no leaks of information to outsiders, about preventing escape. He is told to prepare for extreme measures should the whites approach the city. He understands what this euphemism means. In his notes, he mentions the necessity of readiness, of having men and weapons prepared for any eventuality. His language is dry, bureaucratic, but beneath it lies the chilling clarity of intent. The whites are closing in, and time is short. Every day, Yurovsky updates his superiors on conditions. Every day, the Bolshevik leadership grows more insistent. The Romanovs cannot be allowed to fall into enemy hands. Yet the final order, the explicit command, has not yet been given. Yurovsky waits, prepares, and watches. For the Romanovs, daily life becomes narrower still. The garden plot is less tended. The daughters spend more time in their rooms. Alexei suffers another bleeding episode, leaving him bedridden. His sisters tend to him tenderly, fetching water, reading aloud, singing softly. Nicholas sits beside him, stroking his hair. Alexandra prays more fervently than ever, her rosary beads worn thin between her fingers. They cling to hope, still murmuring that the whites may arrive in time, but the guard's coldness suggests otherwise. Evenings are darker now. The family still gathers for prayers, still sings hymns, but their voices falter. Candlelight flickers against pale faces, eyes ringed with shadows. The walls seem closer, the silence heavier. Outside, boots march past the doors, rifles clatter, voices mutter in languages the daughters do not understand. Anastasia whispers that the house feels like it is shrinking. In truth, it is closing in, not just physically, but in time. Yurovsky's presence is constant. He appears suddenly in doorways, inspects rooms without explanation, questions guards sharply. His authority is absolute, and he uses it without hesitation. The Romanovs do not know his thoughts, but they feel the weight of his gaze. He is the embodiment of a future they cannot escape. A man who has come not to guard indefinitely, but to conclude. And so, as July deepens, the Ipatiev house settles into this new order. The family lives their routines, meals, prayers, brief walks, under stricter eyes, harsher rules, and colder silences. Yurovsky sharpens his preparations, checks his weapons, selects his men. The whites march closer, the Bolsheviks grow more anxious, and the Romanovs, trapped inside, cling to rituals that cannot hold back the tide. The house of special purpose is no longer just a prison. Under Yurovsky, it has become a stage, its players rehearsing unknowingly for a final act that history has already scripted. The last days unfold not in drama, but in smallness. For the Romanovs, July 1918 slips forward in fragments, prayers, stitches of embroidery, spoonfuls of thin soup. Nicholas's terse diary entries. It is only in hindsight that one sees how everything tightens, how every hour is in fact a countdown. Inside the Ipatiev house, though, life clings to routine, because routine is the only shield they have against dread. The weather is warm. The sun presses down on the wooden planks of the fence outside, bleaching them pale. Inside, the air grows stuffy, heavy with kerosene fumes from lamps that burn late into the night. The family tries to open a window for relief, but Yurovsky forbids it. They must remain sealed away, cut off from any contact with the world beyond. Even the yard walks are shorter now, sometimes only 10 minutes, a slow circuit under the gaze of armed guards before being herded back inside. The daughters exchange glances but say nothing. Alexei is carried across the grass, pale and wan, his legs too weak to bear him. The family continues their rituals. Every morning, Nicholas rises first, washes, and makes his bed neatly. He shaves, trims his beard, straightens his tunic. He does these things with mechanical precision, as if each small act of order can hold back the chaos pressing against the walls. Alexandra stays in bed longer, her body racked with pain, but she insists on gathering her strength for evening prayers. The daughters sew, their fingers moving quickly, the click of needles a steady background to the silence. Olga reads, Tatiana organizes, Maria hums softly as she works. Anastasia tries to amuse her siblings with small jokes, once putting her embroidery needle through a crust of bread to make it look like a pretend feast. Her sisters smile, but only faintly. At meals, the conversation has grown thinner. Nicholas remarks on the weather, on small chores in the garden. Alexandra mentions dreams she has had, interpreting them as signs of eventual deliverance. Olga keeps quiet, absorbed in her own brooding. Tatiana asks practical questions. Will the whites come soon? Will they be moved again? No one has answers. Alexei eats what he can, though his illness drains him. The servants do their best. apologizing for bland soups and stale bread. Everyone pretends this is normal, though each pause in conversation carries the weight of unspoken fear. The guards, too, have changed. They no longer joke or exchange glances with the daughters. Under Yurovsky's strict rule, they stand stiffer, speak less, keep their rifles always at the ready. When they do speak, their tone is sharper. Some avert their eyes altogether. The Romanovs notice. Maria whispers to her sisters that the men seem different, harder. Anastasia wonders aloud if they know something. No one replies. Nicholas continues his diary, though the entries are sparse. Walked in the yard, weather warm. Alexei unwell. He notes no fear, no speculation. Only the plainest of facts. Historians will later marvel at this. How a man on the edge of annihilation could write so flatly, but perhaps it is the only way he can survive, by treating each day as simply another to be marked, not measured. Alexandra writes too, though her notes are full of prayers, appeals to God, pleas for strength. She tells her daughters that suffering is redemptive, that they must endure with patience. They listen dutifully, though in their faces you see something else. Weariness, uncertainty, a quiet despair. Their faith is deep, but even faith struggles against the heavy silence of the house waiting for orders. Outside, the sounds of war creep closer. Gunfire echoes faintly, sometimes a low rumble of artillery in the distance. The family hears it during evening prayers, pausing to listen, eyes bright with hope. It must be the whites, Tatiana whispers once, but the guards only scowl, warning them to keep silent. The hope flickers, then fades. Still, each night the daughters whisper in their beds, maybe tomorrow, maybe they will come. Alexei suffers badly during these days. A fall from a chair earlier that summer had triggered another hemorrhage, leaving him bedridden. His sisters fuss over him constantly, bringing him toys, reading aloud, singing softly. Anastasia sits beside him telling stories and jokes. Nicholas carries him gently when he needs to move, his father's hands trembling as he lifts the fragile boy. Alexandra spends hours at his side, stroking his hair, murmuring prayers. His illness adds to the family's despair if they are to be moved again. How will Alexei survive the journey? Even the sisters exchange worried glances at this question. Meanwhile, Yurovsky grows more present. He appears suddenly in rooms, checking windows, inspecting locks, speaking briefly with guards. He examines the basement carefully, measuring walls, noting spaces. The family sees him but cannot understand why he lingers there. To them, he is simply another commandant. To history, he is the man preparing the site of their end. The family does not know this, of course. They cling to hope in small ways. They celebrate Alexandra's name day with prayers and a simple meal. Maria draws sketches. Olga writes poems. Anastasia still makes jokes, once hiding a guard's cap and giggling when he scowled. Even Nicholas manages a faint smile. These small acts are not joy exactly. They are resistance, fragments of humanity held against the crushing weight of confinement. In the evenings, prayers grow longer. Candles flicker in front of icons, wax dripping onto the table. The family kneels, their voices rising softly, the words of ancient liturgy filling the room. The guards watch through the crack of the door, expressionless. Nicholas bows low. Alexandra clasps her rosary. The daughters cross themselves with solemn gestures. Even Alexei, weak and pale, murmurs the prayers from his bed. For them, these rituals are the only constant, the only barrier between themselves and despair. Yet, underneath, dread seeps through. Olga writes in her diary of strange moods among the guards. Tatiana notes that restrictions are tighter. Nicholas remarks on a sense of unrest. They feel it, though they cannot name it. The air itself seems charged, heavy with something unsaid. Anastasia whispers to her sisters one night that she dreamed of fire, Maria says nothing but grips her hand tightly. The servants feel it too. The cook apologizes more often. The maid moves more quietly. The doctor grows paler each day. They know, perhaps more than the family, what the Bolsheviks are likely to do, but they cannot speak it aloud. Silence becomes the only language in the house. Silence and the sound of locks turning. And so the final days pass in this rhythm. Prayers, meals, short walks, faint hopes, heavy silences. The family clings to life with dignity, but they are not blind. They see the guards' hard highs, hear the distant gunfire, feel the house tightening around them. They do not know the exact hour, but they know the truth. The end is near. Still, they live those days as best they can. Nicholas notes the weather. Alexandra prays. The daughters sew. Alexei listens to stories. They eat their meager meals, sing their hymns, whisper in the night. They do what families do, even when the world outside has already written them off. That is the strange, poignant truth of those last days. History was sharpening its blade, but inside the Apateyev house, the Romanovs still stitched, still prayed, still clung to the fragile thread of life. In Moscow, far from the shuttered windows of the Apateyev house, the Romanovs' fate is a constant shadow, lurking at the edge of every meeting. The Bolshevik government, besieged on all sides, juggles crises like a street juggler with knives. Foreign armies in the north, Czechoslovak Legion uprisings along the railways, food shortages that spark riots, and the White Army pressing westward. And always, in the background, the problem of Nicholas and his family. What to do with them? What message should their fate send? In early July 1918, the debates reach fever pitch. Lenin, chairman of the Council of People's Commissars, is pragmatic to the core. To him, the Romanovs are not just people, but symbols, chess pieces in a larger game. Keeping them alive means risk that monarchists could rally around them, risk that foreign governments could demand their release, risk that the whites might seize them and use them as figureheads. Killing them would solve the problem swiftly, but create others. Outrage abroad, backlash among peasants, who still feel a lingering loyalty to little Father Nicholas. At Lenin's side is Yakov Sverdlov, chairman of the All-Russian Central Executive Committee. Sverdlov is more decisive, more ruthless. He argues that the Romanovs must be eliminated, not only Nicholas but the entire family, so long as even one remains. He reportedly says, "They will be used against us." His logic is cold, but in the brutal arithmetic of revolution, it makes sense. Kill the dynasty, and you kill the dream of restoration. Leave any alive, and the whites will have a banner. Still, the idea of executing the entire family is not universally accepted. Some Bolsheviks believe a trial should be staged. They picture a grand tribunal, Nicholas hauled before the people, forced to answer for war, famine, and Bloody Sunday. It would be a spectacle of justice, a revolutionary counterpart to the old show trials of Tsarist times. Others imagine exile, ship them abroad, let them rot in obscurity, remove the symbol without the blood. But each option collides with the harsh reality of war. There is no time, no secure rail lines, no guarantee that trials or transfers won't end in disaster. Foreign diplomats add to the tension. The Germans, bound by the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, show interest in Alexandra, who was born a German princess. They hint at exchanges, though their armies are exhausted from war. The British, once considered potential rescuers, hesitate. Prime Minister David Lloyd George worries about the optics of offering asylum to a deposed monarch when his own people suffer food shortages. King George V, Nicholas's cousin, had initially considered granting refuge, but political pressure in Britain, fear of public backlash, anti-monarchist sentiment, made him withdraw the offer. The Romanovs, once bound by kinship to Europe's crowned heads, now find themselves abandoned by them. In the smoky council rooms of Moscow, this abandonment is noted. No one is coming. As the White Army advances toward Ekaterinburg, the urgency sharpens. Reports cross Lenin's desk daily. The Whites are at Omsk. The Czechoslovaks control key stretches of the Trans-Siberian Railway. Red defenses are thin. Each report underscores the danger. If Ekaterinburg falls, the Romanovs fall into enemy hands. And if that happens, every victory the revolution has won could unravel. Lenin does not leave behind a signed order, at least none that survives, but witnesses later recall his words. He speaks of the necessity of resolving the Romanov question. He emphasizes that Nicholas cannot be allowed to live. As for Alexandra and the children, his words are more carefully phrased, but Sverdlov and the Ural Soviet take them as clear, eliminate them all. Later Soviet accounts would blur the lines, some claiming Lenin never gave the direct command, others insisting he did. What matters is the outcome. Moscow gave no order to spare them. Meanwhile, in Ekaterinburg, the Ural Soviet interprets the silence as license. Telegrams flash between the city and Moscow, couched in euphemism. The question of the prisoner is pressing. Extreme measures may be required. The replies are vague. Take responsibility locally. These are not instructions to wait. They are tacit approvals, the sort of bureaucratic language that leaves blood on hands without ink on paper. In those days, Bolshevik propaganda intensifies. Newspapers publish screeds denouncing Nicholas as a tyrant, a butcher of peasants, a weakling who lost the war. Cartoons depict him as a pig in a crown, a spider in a web of soldiers' corpses. The message is clear: this man does not deserve mercy, but still, there is unease. Killing a Tsar is not a small matter, even for revolutionaries. Russia's Orthodox faithful might see it as sacrilege. Abroad, monarchies might respond with fury. The government must frame it carefully. Nicholas as a criminal, executed, not as a martyr. And what of the family? Here the debates grow more tangled. Some Bolsheviks argue the children should be spared, perhaps sent abroad. Others insist that leaving even one Romanov alive invites disaster. You cannot cut down the tree and leave the roots, one delegate says. The Ural Soviet, more radical than Moscow's leaders, leans toward total elimination. Their reasoning is brutal. If the Whites take the city, the Romanovs will become their rallying point. Better to remove the risk entirely. Yurovsky, meanwhile, is informed of these debates in careful phrases. He knows enough to begin preparing. He strengthens discipline among his guards, ensures the basement is ready for meetings, checks weapons and ammunition. He writes notes, keeps inventories, sharpens the machinery that will soon be put into motion. He does not yet tell the guards why, but he instructs them to be ready for decisive action. His methodical nature suits the task perfectly. Nothing emotional, nothing chaotic, just cold preparation. For the Romanovs, the silence from Moscow is deafening. They still cling to rumors that their German relatives or British cousins will intervene. Alexandra writes in her diary that God will not forsake us. Nicholas, stoic, marks the weather and small details, never the dread pressing in. The daughters whisper at night about whether they will be moved again, perhaps east, perhaps freed by Whites. They cannot know that their fate is being sealed in words they will never hear, in rooms they will never enter. Lenin, Sverdlov, and their colleagues know the choice will shape the revolution's image. To kill the Romanovs is to declare the monarchy not just deposed but obliterated, its bloodline extinguished. To spare them is to leave a shadow on the horizon. Lenin is not sentimental, his revolution is fragile, and sentiment is a luxury it cannot afford. And so, with silence as cover and local Soviets as executors, the decision hardens. The Romanovs will not survive July. Back in Ekaterinburg, the Ural Soviet braces itself. Meetings grow shorter, sharper. Phrases like "resolve the matter" and "final measures" echo in the hall. Yurovsky receives his role. The guards sense something, though few know exactly what, and in the Ipatiev house the family prays, unaware that their prayers have already been answered, not by deliverance, but by the blunt verdict of politics. The night of July 16 into the early hours of July 17, 1918, begins like so many others for the Romanovs. Dim lamps burning in their rooms, the smell of kerosene thick in the air, the guards' boots creaking on the staircases, and the family huddled close in prayer, yet unseen threads are pulling tight. The Ural Soviet has already decided. Yurovsky has received his instructions. The special purpose of this house is about to be fulfilled. On the evening of July 16, the family's routine seems ordinary. Dinner is served, boiled potatoes, soup thin as water, bread already stale. Nicholas leads a short walk in the yard before dusk. Alexei wheeled carefully by his sisters. They move in silence, the guards' rifles following each step. When they return inside, prayers are said before the icon corner. Alexandra lingers, crossing herself slowly, whispering long appeals to God. Nicholas notes in his diary, his very last entry, weather warm, walked, all children with us, to bed. It is almost cruel in its simplicity, the words of a man who refuses to admit what he may already sense. Meanwhile, Yurovsky prepares. He gathers the guard detail late that night, summoning them into a small room. He speaks plainly, his voice steady. The family is to be executed. The words fall into the air with the weight of stone. Some of the guards are stunned. A few pale, shift uneasily, glance at one another. They had expected to guard prisoners, not shoot women and children. But Yurovsky insists. The whites are advancing. There is no time. The Romanovs must not be allowed to escape, must not be allowed to live as symbols. He hands out weapons, revolvers, rifles, checking each carefully. He explains who will fire where. He is precise, methodical, a commander determined to prevent chaos. Among the guards, tension simmers. Some grumble under their breath. A few mutter that they will not fire on the children. Yurovsky does not argue. He replaces them with others more willing. Several Latvians and Hungarians, foreign Red Guards, are chosen for their loyalty and attachment. Others, hardened by civil war, accept grimly. The room smells of gun oil and sweat as orders are finalized. Shortly after midnight, Yurovsky moves through the house, checking rooms one last time. The Romanovs are asleep upstairs, unaware. Guards stand at attention, faces tight. Outside, the city is quiet, though in the distance the faint rumble of artillery can be heard. The whites are close enough that some wonder if they might yet break through, but Yurovsky cannot risk it. He has his orders. Tonight is the night. At around 1:30 in the morning, Yurovsky wakes the family. He enters quietly with several guards, speaking firmly but politely. "You must come downstairs," he tells Nicholas. "There has been unrest in the city. For your safety, we must move you." Nicholas blinks, confused but calm. He wakes Alexandra, who groans softly from pain. The daughters rise, gathering shawls around their shoulders. Alexei, too weak to walk, is lifted gently into his father's arms. The servants are roused as well. The doctor Botkin, the maid Demidova, the cook Karatanov, the valet Trupp, sleepy-eyed, bewildered. They obey. The family is told to dress quickly. The daughters put on blouses and skirts, fastening bodices that, unbeknownst to the guards, conceal jewels sewn inside for safekeeping. Nicholas dons a simple shirt and trousers, his face set. Alexandra leans on her cane, pale but composed. Anastasia whispers to her sisters, trying to lighten the mood, though her voice trembles. Maria clutches Alexei's hand as he is carried. The procession makes its way down the narrow staircase, the guards' boots echoing on the steps. They descend into the dimly lit basement, a room with a low ceiling, whitewashed walls, and a single small window covered from outside. The air is cool and smells faintly of damp earth and lime. Chairs are arranged hastily against one wall. Nicholas sets Alexei down carefully on a chair, placing a cushion beneath him. Alexandra sits beside him. The daughters cluster nearby, whispering softly. The servants stand close. Yurovsky enters with several guards, his face grave. He announces that the family is to wait here until a truck arrives to move them. Nicholas nods silently. The daughters glance at one another nervously. The room is still, save for the faint crackle of a lantern. While the family waits, Yurovsky steps aside, giving final instructions to his men. Each is assigned a target. Nicholas, Alexandra, the daughters, the servants. He reminds them to fire quickly, to aim true, to leave no survivors. Some guards swallow hard, gripping their weapons tighter. Others nod grimly. Back in the basement, Nicholas murmurs to Alexandra, perhaps reassuring her, perhaps only praying. The daughters fidget, clutching small pillows or shawls. Alexei slumps weakly on his chair, eyes wide, sensing something is wrong. Botkin, the doctor, adjusts his spectacles nervously, trying to maintain calm for the family's sake. Minutes pass, stretching unbearably. The family grows restless. Alexandra asks softly when they will be moved. Nicholas glances toward the door, frowning. The daughters whisper prayers. The servants shift uneasily. And then at last, Yurovsky returns, flanked by guards carrying pistols and rifles. The moment has arrived. The air seems to thicken, the room shrinking around them. The Romanovs cannot yet know, but everything is set. Yurovsky clears his throat, prepares to speak the words that will end an empire. Yurovsky steps into the basement, his boots scraping against the cement floor. The lantern light flickers across whitewashed walls, casting long shadows behind the assembled guards. Nicholas looks up from his chair, his expression calm but questioning, as though waiting for instructions. Alexandra clutches Alexei's hand, her other hand gripping her cane. The daughters press close together, shawls tight around their shoulders. The servants stand at the edges, uncertain, weary-eyed. For a brief moment, the room is utterly still. Then Yurovsky clears his throat, adjusts his spectacles, and speaks with clipped precision. Your relatives have tried to rescue you. In view of this, the Presidium of the Ural Soviet has decided to execute you. The words hang in the air like smoke. Nicholas blinks, stunned. What? What? He asks, his voice rising in disbelief. Alexandra gasps, clutching Alexei. Closer. The daughters stiffen, eyes wide. The servants freeze in horror, and before the words can sink in fully, Yurovsky gives the signal. The guards raise their weapons. In that low-ceilinged basement, the sudden roar of gunfire is deafening. The first shots are aimed at Nicholas. Bullets tear into his chest, knocking him backward against the wall. He groans, collapsing to the floor. Alexandra is hit next, slumping sideways in her chair, her cane clattering to the ground. The daughters scream, huddling together, their voices drowned by the thunder of revolvers. The Dr. Botkin falls instantly, struck in the head. The valet Trupp staggers, clutching his chest, before crumpling. The room fills with smoke and chaos. The guards fire wildly, blinded by the muzzle flashes. Some shots ricochet off walls, leaving chips of plaster. The daughters scream, clutching at one another. Bullets strike their bodices but do not kill the jewels. Sewn inside their corsets, act as armor, deflecting the first volleys. The guards, confused, think they are wearing hidden steel plates. Shouts echo, "Why don't they die?" Yurovsky curses and orders them to aim lower. The guards adjust, firing into legs and arms. The daughters shriek in agony, collapsing to the ground. Maria falls first, hit in the thigh, her face pale with shock. Tatiana clutches her side, groaning. Olga screams prayers, hands pressed to her chest. Anastasia, frantic, crawls along the floor, trying to escape the storm of bullets. Nicholas lies motionless, his body riddled with wounds. Alexandra, gasping, slumps against Alexei's chair. The boy, terrified, grips the arms of his seat. Too weak to move, guards step forward, firing point blank into his small body. His cries echo, then fade. Anastasia, miraculously alive amid the chaos, lets out a piercing scream that cuts through the smoke. A guard lunges with his bayonet, stabbing again and again. Her screams end abruptly. The gunfire fades, leaving only the acrid stench of powder and the moans of the dying. The guards cough, waving away smoke, eyes stinging. Bodies lie scattered across the floor, lifeless or writhing faintly. The echoes of shots still ring in ears, leaving a stunned silence. The servants are dead. Botkin lies face down, his spectacles shattered. Demidova, the maid, had clutched a pillow in front of her chest. Bullets riddled it, her body falling beside it. Kharitonov and Trupp lie sprawled, their blood mingling with that of their masters. The basement reeks of gunpowder, iron, and sweat. The walls are pocked with bullet holes, the floor slick with blood. Guards lean against walls, panting, shaken by what they have done. Some wipe their brows with trembling hands. Others mutter curses, trying to mask their unease. One vomits in the corner. The execution has lasted less than half an hour, but it feels endless, a nightmare carved into reality. Yurovsky surveys the scene grimly. His glasses glint in the lantern light as he orders silence. He checks the bodies one by one, ensuring no movement remains. Nicholas lies sprawled, face serene in death. Alexandra's lips are parted, her rosary still in her hand. Alexei's small frame slumps lifelessly in the chair. The daughters, pale and bloodied, lie in a tangle on the floor. At last Yurovsky nods. It is done. The guards begin the grim task of gathering the bodies. They strip the corpses of jewelry, prying rings from fingers, cutting open bodices to retrieve hidden gems. The sound of tearing fabric and clinking stones fills the air. Even in death, the Romanovs provide wealth for the revolution. Yurovsky insists on order, collecting valuables into sacks, ensuring nothing is pocketed. Still, some guards slip gems into pockets, unseen in the confusion. The bodies are wrapped hastily in sheets and carried upstairs. The floor of the basement is left smeared with blood and bullet casings. The smell of death lingers. Outside, a truck waits in the dark alley, its engine coughing softly. One by one, the corpses are loaded into it, stacked like cargo. The night air is heavy, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. When the truck pulls away, the Ipatayev house falls silent once more. The guards remain uneasy, their faces pale. Some mutter prayers under their breath, crossing themselves despite their revolutionary zeal. Others stare blankly, numbed by what they have just done. Yurovsky alone seems composed, though his lips are pressed thin, his eyes shadowed. Inside the basement, bullet holes scar the walls. Blood seeps into cracks in the floor. The faint echo of screams still seems to linger in the corners, as though the house itself remembers. History has shifted here, not in parliaments or battlefields, but in a dark cellar where an empire ended in smoke and blood. When the shooting stopped and the truck carrying the corpses pulled into the night, the Ipatayev house did not breathe a sigh of relief. It sat heavy, as though the walls themselves sagged with the weight of what had been done. Inside, smoke still lingered in the basement air, powdery and acrid, clinging to the plaster. Bullet holes dotted the whitewashed walls. A grotesque constellation, pools of blood spread slowly across the cement, mixing with fragments of fabric, pearls and shards of glass from shattered lamps. The men who had carried out the deed stood stunned, some rubbing their ears from the ringing, others wiping sweat from their brows. The execution had not gone as planned. In Yurovsky's meticulous notes, the goal had been efficiency, quick shots, swift death, no chaos. Instead, the room had been a cacophony of ricochets, screams, and smoke, so thick that some guards fired blindly. The girls' bodices, lined with diamonds and rubies, had turned bullets aside, prolonging their agony and horrifying the shooters. Bayonets, meant to finish the wounded, had bent against the jewels, forcing guards to stab again and again. Some of the men had flinched away, unable to deliver final blows, while others grew frenzied, stabbing until their arms ached. The whole event, meant to be clinical, became brutal and clumsy. Afterward, the atmosphere among the guards was fractured. A few tried to mask unease with laughter, boasting crudely about their part, puffing themselves up with revolutionary bravado. Others grew silent, pale, avoiding one another's eyes. One man vomited in a corner, unable to steady his stomach. Another whispered prayers, making the sign of the cross despite the party's disapproval. The act, necessary as they had been told, had left them shaken. Even hardened soldiers discovered that shooting children at close range was not the same as killing on the battlefield. Yurovsky, though stern and composed, could not conceal his irritation. The disarray, the noise, the failure to kill quickly. It offended his sense of order. He chastised his men for their hesitation, for their wild firing. Still, he knew the work was not yet done. Death was only the first step. Now came the greater task, disposing of the bodies. If the Whites entered Ekaterinburg and found the corpses, they could use them as propaganda. The world must not see Nicholas and his family laid out as martyrs. Their remains had to vanish. He ordered the basement cleaned. Guards fetched buckets of water, rags and sawdust. They scrubbed blood from the floor, though stains clung stubbornly. They patched bullet holes with plaster, whitewashing them clumsily. The air reeked of lime and iron. Carpets were dragged in to cover the worst marks. But nothing could erase the memory of that night. Those who had been there would forever remember the screams, the smoke, the way the room had shaken with gunfire. Upstairs, the family's room stood eerily quiet. Beds remained unmade, clothing half folded, books open on tables, a chessboard still displayed an unfinished game. The daughter's embroidery lay draped over chairs, needles still threaded, icons hung in corners, candles burned to stubs. It looked less like a place abandoned than a place interrupted, as if the family might return any moment to resume their routine. For the guards walking those halls, the sight was unsettling. It was easier to think of the Romanovs as symbols, enemies of the people, to see their personal belongings, Alexei's toys, Anastasia's sketches, Alexandra's rosary, was to be reminded that they had been flesh and blood. The servants' quarters too bore silent witness. Botkin's spectacles lay on a table, smeared with blood. The cook's apron still hung by the door. The maid's pillow, used as a futile shield, was riddled with bullet holes. These objects, banal in life, had become relics of tragedy overnight. Guards collected them hastily, tossing them into trunks. Yurovsky ordered inventories, determined that nothing of value slip away unnoticed. By dawn, the house was outwardly calm again. The fence still loomed tall, the guards still paced with rifles, the city outside still stirred with the noises of carts and factory whistles. Neighbours, though, whispered uneasily. Shots had been heard in the night, muffled but unmistakable. Lanterns had burned late, wagons had rumbled away. Rumours spread quickly, though none dared speak too loudly. The official word would come later, for now silence was enforced by fear. Inside the Bolshevik ranks, reactions were mixed. Some hailed the act as a triumph, the final blow against monarchy. The Tsar is dead, they said, and with him the last hope of restoration. Others worried, would the people rise in outrage? Would foreign governments condemn them? The secrecy of the operation was meant to shield against these dangers, But secrecy was fragile. Already, rumors were leaking. The guards who had been present were ordered to silence. They were told that history would remember them as revolutionaries, not as butchers. Still, among themselves, they whispered of the horror, the jewels that deflected bullets, the girls who would not die, the choking smoke. Some drank heavily in the following days, trying to quiet the memories. Others hardened, convincing themselves that necessity absolved them. In the revolution's harsh logic, what mattered was survival, not conscience. Yurovsky himself wrote reports, dry and clinical, describing the execution and the steps taken afterward. His words were stripped of emotion, reducing screams and blood to lines of bureaucratic prose, yet even in his notes the disorder of the event bleeds through. The misfiring, the chaos, the need to resort to bayonets. He insists on the political necessity, but between the lines lies the truth. It had been messy, human, and terrible. For the Ipatiev house, the transformation was complete. It had once been an ordinary home, then a prison, then a stage for execution. Now it was a haunted place, every room echoing with absence. The white fence still blocked the street, but behind it, the ghosts of the Romanovs lingered in silence. Guards muttered that they felt watched at night, that footsteps echoed where none walked. Whether superstition or guilt, it gnawed at them. The house had become more than a building. It was now a monument to the end of a dynasty, soaked in secrecy and blood. And so, in the hours after the execution, the immediate aftermath settled over Ekaterinburg like a shroud. The Romanovs were gone, though their presence remained in every unfinished game, every bloodstain, every bullet hole. The guards tried to carry on, the Bolsheviks moved to conceal, but history had already marked the house. In that basement, in that night of gunfire and smoke, the empire of the Romanovs ended, not with ceremony, not with trial, but with the blunt chaos of revolution. The truck rattles away from the Ipatiev house just before dawn, its wooden slats creaking beneath the weight of 11 bodies wrapped in sheets. The horses pulling it snort in the cool morning air, hooves splashing through mud left from a night rain. The city of Ekaterinburg stirs quietly. A few workers trudge toward factories, unaware of the cargo rolling past them. Inside the truck, the corpses of Nicholas, Alexandra, their 5 children and 4 loyal attendants jostle with each bump. The guards riding alongside sit in tense silence, revolvers at their sides, eyes fixed ahead. The deed is done, but the danger is not. The order Yurovsky has been given is clear. The family must disappear. If the whites reach Ekaterinburg and find bodies, they will make them martyrs. If word spreads abroad, the Bolsheviks will face international fury. The Romanovs must vanish into the forests and swamps beyond the city, erased as if they had never existed. It is not just murder, it is concealment, a cover-up as important as the execution itself. The truck lumbers out of the city, heading toward the Koptyaki forest, a stretch of dense woodland dotted with abandoned mines and marshy pits. The road is rough, rutted from weeks of rain and heavy wagons. Guards curse under their breath as wheels sink into mud. One man mutters that the truck feels cursed, as if it carries not bodies but ghosts. Another spits, saying ghosts don't frighten him, only whites with rifles. Still their voices are hushed. The corpses shift with each jolt. Sheets slip aside, revealing faces pale in the dim light. Nicholas's beard matted with blood. Alexandra's lips parted in a final breath. The children twisted unnaturally, their dresses soaked dark. The guards avert their eyes, focusing on the trees ahead. Yurovsky, seated grimly, thinks not of their faces but of the task. He must deliver them to a place no one will find. He must make the end absolute. At first, the plan is simple. The bodies are to be dumped into an abandoned mine shaft at a site known as the Four Brothers. The shaft is deep, the walls narrow. Once the corpses are thrown in, acid will be poured over them, grenades tossed to collapse the entrance. It should be final, efficient. By mid-morning, the truck reaches the site. The guards unload the bodies, carrying them awkwardly, slipping in mud. The shaft yawns before them, a dark hole in the forest floor, cold air rising from its depths. One by one, the corpses are dropped in. They fall with sickening thuds into the darkness, landing atop one another in a grotesque heap. Acid is poured after them, the fumes stinging nostrils. Grenades are tossed, their explosions echoing through the trees. Smoke and dust billow upward. The men cough, step back, wipe grime from their faces. Yurovsky surveys the scene, nods. It seems done, but by evening doubts creep in. Word spreads that local villagers know of the mine. Hunters, peasants, white scouts. Too many might stumble upon the site. Yurovsky fears discovery. The whites are too close. If they find the mine, they will dig. The concealment is not secure enough, and so, in the gathering darkness, he orders the bodies retrieved. The men groan, exhausted, horrified at the thought of hauling corpses from the pit they had just consigned them to. But orders are orders. The work is gruesome. Ropes are lowered, bodies hauled up slick with acid burns and torn flesh. The smell is overpowering, a stench of blood, chemicals, and decay already beginning. Guards gag some wretch. Others wrap scarves around their faces. Muttering curses, they lay the bodies once again in the truck, now even heavier with the reek of death. The forest is silent save for the thump of corpses and the buzz of flies already gathering. The procession sets off again, deeper into the forest. Lanterns swing from the cart, casting dim circles of light. The men are weary, their nerves frayed. Some drink from flasks to steady themselves. Yurovsky rides beside the driver, silent, his mind churning through options. The mine has failed. Another place must be found, one more secure, more hidden. Hours pass as the truck bumps along forest tracks. Finally they halt near a clearing where the ground is softer, marshy. Here Yurovsky decides the bodies will be buried in a shallow grave. They will strip them, burn clothing, pour acid, cover them with earth and brush. No marker, no sign, only the swamp and the trees as witnesses. The men set to work with shovels, digging feverishly under lantern light. Sweat drips from their faces despite the cool night air. Mosquitoes swarm, biting exposed skin. The ground yields grudgingly, roots tangling shovels, mud sucking at boots. Hours pass before the pit is ready. In the meantime, the bodies lie stacked, grim and silent. Some guards avert their eyes, others stare numbly, as though hoping to harden themselves by looking. When the grave is dug, the stripping begins. Clothing is pulled from corpses, heavy with blood. Jewelry sewn into bodices is pried free. Diamonds, rubies, pearls, all gathered into sacks. Even in death, the Romanovs yield treasure. Guards mutter at the irony. The jewels that deflected bullets now spill into revolutionary hands. Yurovsky oversees it all, insisting that valuables be documented, though he knows some gems slip away into pockets. Clothing is burned, flames crackling in the night. The stench of scorched fabric and flesh rises into the air. Acid is poured again, eating into skin and bone. The guards turn their faces, unable to bear the fumes. At last, the bodies are lowered into the pit, one atop another, a tangle of limbs and hair and torn fabric. Earth is shoveled back, thudding onto their forms. Branches and brush are scattered above to disguise the mound. When the men finish, the clearing looks disturbed but not remarkable. Just another patch of churned earth in the endless forest. Dawn is breaking when they finally step back, exhausted. The truck is empty, the pit covered, the flames dying down. Birds stir in the trees, their calls piercing the heavy silence. Yurovsky inspects the site, nods grimly. It is done, at least for now. The Romanovs are hidden, their resting place secret. He warns the men again. Silence is essential. Speak nothing, tell no one. History must not find this grave, but secrecy is fragile. Already, rumors ripple through Ekaterinburg, of shots heard in the night, of wagons heading into the forest, of soldiers carrying strange burdens. Villagers whisper about activity at the mines. Some guards, unable to hold their tongues, let slip fragments of the story in taverns. The Bolshevik authorities scramble to contain the leaks, insisting that Nicholas alone has been executed. The rest of the family move to safety. Few believe it, but for now, no one can prove otherwise. Back in the city, the Apatiev house stands eerily still. The rooms are empty, beds stripped, embroidery unfinished. The piano gathers dust. The chessboard remains set mid-game. To the guards still stationed there, the silence is suffocating. They avoid the basement, its patched walls and scrubbed floor, unable to hide what happened. Some whisper that they hear voices at night, footsteps on the stairs. Others simply drink, trying to forget. For Yurovsky and his men, there is no forgetting. They have carried 11 bodies through mud and forest, burned and buried them, tried to erase them, yet the memory clings like smoke, staining their minds. Even those who believe in the necessity of the act find themselves haunted. The revolution demanded it, they tell themselves. The whites would have used them, they insist. But at night, when sleep is thin, they hear again the screams in the basement, the thud of bodies dropped into darkness, the hiss of acid on flesh. And so, as July 17 dawns fully, Ekaterinburg wakes to a new reality. The Romanovs are gone, though few know the truth. City carries on. Factories clatter, trains whistle, propaganda posters proclaim victory for the revolution. Yet beneath the noise lies a silence that cannot be named. An empire has ended not in ceremony but in the back of a truck, in a pit in a forest, and no matter how carefully the Bolsheviks try to cover it, the ground itself remembers. The night's work in the forest leaves the men weary, but Yurovsky's task is not finished. Concealment is as vital as execution. If the whites arrive and stumble upon the pit, all the secrecy collapses. By morning of July 17, the commander is already uneasy. The burial ground looks too obvious, the earth too freshly churned. Worse, the ground is shallow, waterlogged. Within days, animals or rains could expose the corpses. Yurovsky, ever methodical, decides more must be done. He orders the truck loaded again. The groans from his men are not subtle. They are exhausted, sickened by the labor of digging and redigging, handling bodies they want never to see again. Yet orders cannot be refused. The men haul the corpses once more from their shallow grave. Sheets cling to them, soaked through with acid burns and clotted blood. The smell is overpowering, thick and metallic, mixed with the sharp sting of chemicals. Several guards gag. One mutters that even the forest itself seems to recoil. This time, Yurovsky plans to split the group. Some bodies will be burned, others buried in separate sites. If the whites find one pit, they may not find the others. Confusion will serve as protection. The truck lurches through the forest paths, carrying its grim cargo deeper into the Koptyaki woods. Lanterns swing, illuminating pale faces and tangled hair beneath the sheets. At a clearing near a swamp, Yurovsky halts. Here, the bodies of Nicholas and Alexandra, along with a few of the servants, are chosen for burning. Logs are dragged into a pile, drenched with kerosene. The corpses are laid across the wood, sheets stripped away, valuables searched again. Flames are lit, crackling fiercely. The fire roars upward, sparks leaping into the night. The stench is unbearable, burned flesh, hair and fabric, mingling into a choking haze. The guards turn their faces, some crossing themselves despite the party's atheism. One man vomits in the undergrowth. Another stares grimly, forcing himself not to flinch. But burning proves less effective than Yurovsky hopes. The bodies do not disintegrate easily. Fat sizzles, skin blackens, bones char, but the remains are stubborn. After hours, charred limbs still protrude from the embers. Guards prod them with poles, breaking bones, trying to push them deeper into the flames. Yurovsky curses the inefficiency. The revolution demands erasure, but the dead refuse to vanish so neatly. The rest of the bodies, most of the children, are taken farther into the forest. Here another pit is dug, deeper and broader. Again, jewels are pried from clothing, acid poured over faces, limbs hacked crudely to fit the trench. Earth is shoveled back hastily, branches strewn above. Yurovsky notes every step, determined to account for valuables and ensure no trace remains visible. His men, though, grow more sullen. They mutter that the work feels cursed, that the forest itself is swallowing them into guilt. The Bolsheviks back in Ekaterinburg issue strict instructions, secrecy above all. The official announcement, when it comes, states only that Nicholas has been executed. Alexandra, the children, and the servants, it claims, have been removed to a safe place. This half-truth is designed to soften outrage. The Tsar, executed as a criminal, might be explained to the people as justice. Children shot in a basement could not. The cover story spreads quickly. Workers nod grimly at the necessary justice of Nicholas's death. Peasants whisper that the family lives elsewhere. Abroad, diplomats are puzzled. Rumors swirl, but no proof emerges. Inside the Ural Soviet, confidence is mixed with unease. They believe they have secured their revolution by eliminating the Romanovs, yet they know secrecy is fragile. Too many men were present. Too many tongues could slip. Already some guards talk loosely in taverns. Stories leak of shots in the night, of jewels hidden in corsets, of bodies dumped in forests. The authorities scramble to silence gossip, threatening punishment, but rumors are weeds. They spring up faster than they can be cut. Yurovsky himself writes reports, careful and detailed, recording what was done. He lists valuables collected, jewels seized, clothing destroyed. His tone is bureaucratic, stripped of emotion, yet in his private notes, irritation shows. The execution had been chaotic, the disposal sloppy, the secrecy already fraying. He worries that history will remember the disorder rather than the necessity. He insists that the act was justified, that the revolution demanded it. Still, the very fact he documents it so carefully suggests a man uneasy with the ghosts he has created. Meanwhile, the city buzzes. By July 18, news of Nicholas's death is officially announced. Nicholas Romanov has been executed by a decision of the Ural Soviet. The wording is cold, clinical. Crowds gather to read the posters. Some cheer, declaring the tyrant has met his fate. Others cross themselves, murmuring prayers for the murdered Tsar. A few whisper that the daughters were seen carried away, that perhaps they still live. Uncertainty lingers, fed by the Bolsheviks' half-truths. The Whites, marching ever closer, hear the rumors too. When they finally reach Ekaterinburg later that month, they will search feverishly for the family, digging at mine shafts, scouring forest, interrogating locals. For now, though, the Bolsheviks believe they have bought themselves time. The graves are hidden, the bodies burned or buried, the story muddled. It is enough to carry the revolution forward, at least for the moment. But among the men who carried out the concealment, memory cannot be so easily buried. They dream of the basement, the screams, the stubborn jewels, the smoke of burning flesh. Some drink heavily, trying to forget. Others brag, insisting they struck blows for the revolution. A few slip into silence, never speaking of that night again. The forest keeps its secrets, but the men do not. In whispers, in taverns, in fragments of letters, the truth leaks out, seeping into history like blood through soil. And so, in those days after July 17, Concealment is frantic, messy, incomplete. The Bolsheviks burn, bury, and scatter. Trying to erase an empire with shovels and acid, they succeed for a time, long enough to claim victory, long enough to hold power. Yet their secrecy carries within it the seeds of revelation. For though earth may cover bodies, it cannot silence memory forever. When the White Army enters Ekaterinburg later in July 1918, the city wears the haggard look of a place that has held its breath for too long. The Red Guards withdraw in disorder, carts loaded with supplies clattering over the cobbles as they flee east. Villagers along the roads watch nervously as Bolsheviks retreat, their propaganda posters peeling in the summer heat. And then, almost overnight, white troops march in, boots striking pavement, banners fluttering, officers barking orders for monarchists, for anti-Bolsheviks. It feels like liberation. But for those who know what transpired at the Apateyev house, liberation has come too late. Rumours already precede the whites. Word spreads that Nicholas has been executed. Some whisper that the family is dead, others that they were spirited away to Siberia. The truth is a fog that no one can pierce. When white officers first step through the gates of the Apateyev house, they expect to find answers. Instead, they find silence. The house stands as it did weeks earlier, its fence high, its windows shuttered. Inside, rooms remain eerily intact. Beds still bear the impressions of sleepers. The daughter's embroidery lies abandoned on chairs, threads still dangling. A half-finished chessboard waits in the corner. On a window sill, a pot of wilted flowers droops. To the investigators, it is as though time stopped on July 16. The family simply vanished. But the basement tells a different story. When white officers descend the narrow stairs, lanterns in hand, the air is thick with dampness. The walls are whitewashed, patched clumsily in places. The floor shows strange marks, scratches, stains scrubbed but not gone. Bullet holes pock the plaster, small but unmistakable. Here and there dark stains linger in cracks, blood seeping deep into cement. In corners, officers pick up spent cartridges, tiny brass clues. The smell is faint but undeniable, a metallic tang that clings to stone. One officer bends close to the wall and whispers, "This is where it happened." His words settle heavily on the men. They know now that Nicholas did not simply vanish. He died here, along with his family. Yet without bodies, they cannot prove it. The White Army immediately launches an investigation. Judge Nikolai Sokolov is appointed to lead it, a man meticulous and determined. He walks the rooms of the Apateyev house with notebook in hand, recording every detail, the patched plaster, the stains, the scattered possessions. He collects cartridges, fragments of bone, shards of glass. He interviews neighbors, guards, anyone willing to speak. Slowly, a picture emerges. Locals tell of shots in the night of July 16-17. Some saw wagons rumbling out of the city before dawn. Others whisper that the guards were unusually tense that week, their faces drawn. A few admit they heard screams carried on the night air, muffled by the tall fence. Bit by bit, fragments align. The family was executed in the basement, their bodies taken into the forest. Sokolov follows the trail into the Koptyaki woods. He questions villagers who saw trucks heading toward the mines. He inspects shafts at the Four Brothers site, lowering lanterns into the dark. At the bottom he finds bones, scraps of clothing, the severed finger adorned with a jeweled ring. He orders the shaft drained, and more grisly evidence surfaces: buttons, corset stays, teeth, fragments of skull. But the bodies themselves are gone. The Bolsheviks have moved them, burned them, hidden them too well. Undeterred, Sokolov expands his search. He scours clearings, digs in pits, sifts through ash. In one site he finds charred bones and fragments of jewels. In another, he uncovers traces of acid-eaten fabric. His notebooks fill with sketches, diagrams, testimonies. The evidence mounts. Nicholas, Alexandra, their children, their servants, all were murdered. Yet he cannot recover the whole truth. The forest conceals more than it reveals. Still, the White investigation captures the imagination of the world. Newspapers across Europe and America publish headlines: Tsar murdered by Bolsheviks, Romanov family vanished. Reports describe the bullet-scarred basement, the discovery of bone fragments, the jewels melted by fire. Public outrage spreads. Monarchists howl that the revolutionaries are butchers. Socialists defend the act as necessary. Ordinary readers shudder at the details: jewels sewn into bodices, bayonets driven into children, acid poured on corpses. The Romanovs become not just a fallen dynasty, but a symbol of revolutionary violence. Yet the investigation is haunted by incompleteness. Without full bodies, without undeniable proof, rumors flourish. Some claim that one or more of the daughters survived, spirited away by sympathetic guards. Stories of Anastasia or Maria escaping spread like wildfire, whispered in drawing rooms, printed in tabloids. Imposters emerge in later years, claiming to be lost Romanovs. The very absence of bodies feeds the myth. Sokolov's evidence is strong but not final, leaving gaps where imagination takes root. Meanwhile, in Russia itself, the civil war rages. The Whites cannot hold Ekaterinburg indefinitely. As Red forces regroup and push back, the city changes hands again. Sokolov flees east, carrying his files, photographs, and collected evidence in crates. He hopes to preserve the truth, to show the world what happened. He never finds the bodies, but his meticulous work ensures the story cannot be buried completely. For the Bolsheviks, the White discovery is a problem. They had hoped secrecy would protect them, but by admitting only Nicholas's execution, they could blunt outrage. But Sokolov's findings spread abroad, making denial impossible. Lenin's government responds with propaganda, insisting that Nicholas was guilty of crimes against the people, that his execution was justice. As for the family, they remain silent, letting rumor swirl. Silence, they hope, is safer than admission. And so, in those weeks after the Whites take Ekaterinburg, the first outlines of the truth begin to emerge. The basement of the Apatov house whispers of gunfire. The forest yields fragments of bone and jewel. Testimonies weave together a picture of brutality. The Romanovs, once rulers of the largest empire on earth, are confirmed dead, not in exile, not in escape, but in blood and smoke. Yet mystery endures. No graves are found, no bodies laid out. The questions remain. Where are they? Did all die? Could one have lived? These uncertainties linger for decades, feeding legend, shaping memory. The Whites discover much, but not enough. They shine a lantern into the darkness, yet shadows remain, and in those shadows myth grows, entwining with history, refusing to die. From the moment the Ural Soviet announced Nicholas's execution, the Bolsheviks faced the difficult task of shaping the narrative. Revolution thrives on symbols, and Nicholas was both liability and opportunity. Liability as a martyr if the Whites could display his corpse. Opportunity as a criminal if the Reds could present him as punished. The way his death was explained or concealed would determine how the world judged the new regime. On July 18, 1918, the official Soviet press release appeared. It was terse, almost bureaucratic. Nicholas Romanov, the former Tsar who was the sworn enemy of the people, has been executed by decision of the Ural Soviet. No mention of Alexandra, the children, or the servants. No mention of a basement or bullets. Just Nicholas, reduced to a man with a surname, dispatched for crimes against the people. The Bolsheviks framed it as justice, not murder, an act of necessity in the chaos of civil war. Yet silence spoke louder than words. Where were the others? Foreign diplomats asked immediately. German officials in particular pressed for information about Alexandra, herself a German princess. Were she and the children safe? Lenin's government dodged, claiming they had been removed to a secure location. Some Bolsheviks even floated the story that the family had been evacuated eastward. In Petrograd and Moscow, rumors multiplied. The Tsarina and daughters were alive in Perm. Alexei had been sent to Germany. Anastasia hidden in a convent. The ambiguity was deliberate. The Soviets wanted to blunt outrage without admitting to the full massacre. Inside Russia, the propaganda machine went to work. Pamphlets portrayed Nicholas as a tyrant who had bled the country dry during war, squandered lives and crushed workers' protests. Posters showed him dripping with blood, standing atop heaps of peasant corpses. Newspapers reprinted lists of supposed crimes. Bloody Sunday in 1905, the disastrous war with Japan, the famine years, the carnage of the Great War. The message was simple: his death was not tragedy, but justice. The people were told to see him not as a fallen Tsar, but as a criminal punished. And yet even among committed revolutionaries, unease lingered. Shooting Nicholas might be explained. Shooting Alexandra, bedridden with illness, was harder to defend. Shooting children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and especially young Alexei, was impossible to justify openly. The Bolsheviks knew this. To admit the full truth risked backlash not only abroad, but at home, among peasants and soldiers who still harbored loyalty to the Little Father. Thus silence became policy. Lenin himself remained careful. He never publicly acknowledged the family's deaths. In private, he may have accepted or even ordered it, but in speeches and writings, he referred only to Nicholas. When questioned by foreign envoys, he deflected, insisting the revolution had the right to punish tyrants. Sverdlov, his close ally, likewise maintained the line. Other Soviet leaders followed suit, refusing to elaborate. This ambiguity allowed them to control the story. Nicholas dead, the family vanished, and no details provided. Still, whispers persisted. In taverns and market squares, peasants speculated that one or more daughters had escaped. Some claimed a girl had been seen on a train guarded by soldiers. Others swore a boy resembling Alexei was hidden in a monastery. Meanwhile, the Ipatiev house itself became a problem. Whites had already discovered its secrets during their brief occupation, collecting bullets and bloodstains as evidence. When the Reds retook Ekaterinburg, the house remained at its walls, whispering of what had happened. Locals called it the House of Special Purpose, but everyone knew it was the House of Death. To ordinary citizens walking past, the high fence seemed to radiate unease. In later years, the Soviets would destroy it entirely, bulldozing the structure to erase the physical reminder. But in 1918, it still stood, a mute monument to silence. The secrecy, however, was never perfect. Too many men had been present, too many tongues loosened by vodka. From the very beginning, stories slipped out. A guard bragged in a tavern about jewels sewn into bodices. Another muttered of screams that would not end. Sokolov's investigation carried west with the whites, spread more details. Foreign journalists picked them up, sensationalized them, printed them in headlines. The Soviet leadership could not contain the truth forever, but they could muddy it, delay it, control its shape. Thus the narrative hardened, Nicholas executed, justice served, family relocated. It was a lie, but a lie with purpose. It bought time, shielded the revolution, and allowed the Bolsheviks to survive their most precarious year. By the time fuller details emerged decades later, Lenin was long dead, the Soviet Union firmly established. The truth, when admitted, would no longer threaten survival. It would be history, not politics. In July 1918, though, it was still raw. The Bolsheviks had gambled that secrecy and propaganda could outweigh outrage. And for a time, They were right. The world raged, but the revolution endured. The Romanovs were gone, reduced to whispers and rumors, their fate a blank space in official reports. In that silence, the Soviet state found its shield, and in that silence, legends were born that would last for generations. The years after 1918 were years of silence. The Soviet Union, forged in the fires of civil war, built itself on propaganda and selective memory. Nicholas II's execution was acknowledged, framed as revolutionary justice, but the deaths of Alexandra, the children, and the servants were never admitted openly. To speak of them was to invite questions, and questions were dangerous in a state that prided itself on certainty. For decades, the Romanovs were ghosts officially unmentioned, even as whispers of their fate traveled underground. In the 1920s, when the Civil War ended and the Bolsheviks consolidated power, the party maintained its line. Nicholas had been executed, the rest of the family removed. Pravda and Izvestia occasionally ran pieces, reminding workers of his crimes. Bloody Sunday, the disastrous war with Japan, the famine years, the Great War that bled Russia white. The message was clear: the Tsar deserved no pity, but about Alexandra, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei, nothing. It was as if they had been erased, swept into the shadows. Yet abroad, the question refused to die. Monarchist émigrés, scattered across Europe, clung to the hope that some had survived. In Paris, in Berlin, in London, rumours swirled. Anastasia had escaped through a secret passage. Alexei had been smuggled out by loyal guards. The daughters had been hidden in convents. These stories, born of grief and disbelief, gained momentum because the Soviets' silence left space for imagination. The most famous of these was the case of Anna Anderson. In 1920, a woman was pulled from a canal in Berlin after a suicide attempt. Institutionalized, she began claiming to be Anastasia, the youngest Romanov daughter. Her story electrified the world. Some who met her swore she resembled the lost Grand Duchess, that she knew details only Anastasia could know. Others dismissed her as a fraud, a troubled woman spinning fantasy. For decades, her claim divided historians, relatives, and monarchists, until DNA tests in the 1990s finally disproved her. But in the mid-20th century, she was a living symbol of the uncertainty born from Soviet silence. Meanwhile, in Russia itself, the topic was taboo. Under Stalin, history was rewritten constantly, but the Romanovs rarely appeared in the new narratives. To mention them risks sounding sympathetic to monarchy. Instead, schoolbooks emphasized the crimes of the Tsarist regime, the poverty of peasants, the cruelty of the Okhrana secret police. The Romanovs were reduced to villains in the official story, and their murders were left vague. Stalin had no desire to admit to child killings. Even his brutal regime preferred to leave that detail in shadow. Still, rumors persisted within the Soviet Union. Old guards who had been present at Ekaterinburg sometimes talked after too much vodka. Villagers in the Urals whispered about trucks carrying bodies into the forest. Children heard tales of hidden graves, of jewels scattered in the dirt, of spirits haunting the mines. These whispers were never written down, but they traveled by word of mouth, a hidden undercurrent beneath the official silence. In the 1930s, Judge Nikolai Sokolov's investigative files, carried west with the retreating whites, were published in Paris. His photographs of the Ipatiev basement, his sketches of bullet holes, his catalogue of bone fragments and jewels. These electrified monarchist émigrés, they were proof, or as close to proof as anyone had then. Yet without full bodies, uncertainty lingered. Sokolov insisted all had died, but others argued that his evidence was circumstantial. The mystery persisted, fueled by grief and hope. Through the Second World War, the Romanovs remained absent from Soviet propaganda. Stalin had no interest in acknowledging them when the state needed unity against Nazi invasion. Ironically, Hitler himself occasionally invoked the Romanovs in speeches, portraying Bolshevism as the murderer of children. In the West, wartime propaganda echoed the story of the basement execution, though details were often exaggerated. For ordinary Russians, however, the subject remained off limits, spoken of only in whispers. It was not until the 1960s that the Soviet Union cautiously allowed historians to mention the family again, usually as an afterthought in accounts of the revolution. Even then, details were vague, softened, often inaccurate. The official line was that Nicholas had been shot as a tyrant. The fate of the others was glossed over. This deliberate vagueness preserved the state's dignity, better a half-truth than an admission that the revolution's founding act included the butchery of children. Yet outside the USSR, fascination only deepened. Books, plays, and films romanticized the Romanovs, painting them as tragic victims, innocent children swept away by history. Anastasia, in particular, became a figure of legend, her name whispered as the girl who might have escaped, her story told in novels and later even in musicals and animated films. The myth of survival became more enduring than the truth, precisely because truth was absent. Meanwhile, in Ekaterinburg itself, the Ipatiev house still stood. Locals knew what had happened there, even if they could not say it openly. The building became a quiet landmark, ominous in its orderliness. People passed it with lowered eyes, whispering that ghosts lingered within its walls. By the 1970s, the Soviet leadership decided even its presence was a problem. In 1977, under Leonid Brezhnev, the house was demolished, ostensibly as part of urban renewal. In reality, it was to erase the physical reminder of the execution. Yet erasure only deepened the mystery. It was in the late Soviet years, particularly under Gorbachev's policy of glasnost in the 1980s, that the silence finally cracked. Historians began to dig into archives. Local researchers in the Urals searched the forests again, piecing together testimonies, rumors, and Sokolov's old notes. They found clues, disturbed earth, scattered bones, buttons, jewels that suggested graves had indeed been hidden nearby. The Soviet state, tottering toward collapse, could no longer control the narrative as tightly. By the early 1990s, after the USSR's fall, the truth began to emerge in earnest. Excavations revealed the remains of most of the Romanovs in a shallow grave near Ekaterinburg. DNA testing, conducted internationally, confirmed their identities beyond doubt. For the first time in 70 years, the silence lifted, and the family's fate was no longer rumor, but fact. Yet the decades of secrecy had left a mark. The myths of survival, the imposters, the romantic legends, all had taken root because of the Soviet refusal to admit the whole truth. The silence had preserved mystery, and mystery had become as powerful as history. When the remains were discovered, some still refused to believe. Even today, fringe voices insist Anastasia or Alexei survived, clinging to myths born in the gap between propaganda and reality. Thus, the later Soviet revelations were a paradox. On one hand, they confirmed what many had always suspected. The entire family was murdered in July 1918, their bodies burned and buried in the forests. On the other, they could not erase 70 years of rumor. The silence itself had become part of the story, shaping the way the Romanovs were remembered, not just as victims, but as mysteries. And so, in those long Soviet decades, the truth lay hidden beneath layers of propaganda and fear. Nicholas was condemned as a tyrant, the family vanished into vagueness, and the silence stretched across generations. But silence is never complete. Whispers, rumors, and myths filled the void, ensuring that the Romanovs, though erased from textbooks, lived on in imagination. When the truth finally surfaced, it came not as revelation, but as confirmation of what the world had always half believed. The revolution had killed them all. It had simply taken 70 years for the state to admit it. The 20th century did not let the Romanovs rest. For decades, their story drifted between silence, rumor, and myth, until fragments of bone and jewel in the Ural soil began to tell the tale. The Soviets had tried to erase. The discovery of their remains and the long road to recognition became one of history's strangest epilogues, where science, politics, and memory entwined. In 1979, local researchers in Ekaterinburg quietly uncovered a shallow grave near the old Koptyaki forest. Buried within were human remains, bones charred and broken, mixed with soil and traces of acid. The find was hushed up. Brezhnev's Soviet Union had no interest in revisiting old ghosts. The bones were reburied in secret, and the files locked away. Yet word spread in whispers, and when Glasnost arrived under Mikhail Gorbachev in the 1980s, the search resumed. By 1991, after the Soviet Union collapsed, the grave was opened officially. Scientists and historians gathered, their hands brushing away earth that had hidden the last imperial family for 73 years. Skulls, ribs, pelvises, all emerged, fragile and stained. Jewelry fragments lay scattered among them. Pearls, emeralds, buttons from uniforms. 9 sets of remains were counted. 2 were missing. DNA testing, still a new science in the early 1990s, was applied with meticulous care. Samples were compared with living relatives of the Romanovs across Europe. Prince Philip of Britain, a descendant through maternal lines, provided blood. The results confirmed the identities beyond doubt. Nicholas, Alexandra and 3 daughters, Olga, Tatiana and Anastasia, along with the loyal servants. Alexei and 1 daughter, likely Maria, were absent. The mystery lingered. Where were the missing 2? In 2007, a second grave was found nearby, containing charred bone fragments of a boy and a girl. Forensic analysis confirmed what many had long suspected. These were Alexei and Maria. At last, all 11 were accounted for. The scientific verdict was final, closing the door on decades of imposters and speculation. The myths of survival, Anastasia in Berlin, Alexei in Canada, collapsed under the weight of DNA strands. Yet, discovery did not mean peace. In Russia of the 1990s, racked by economic collapse and political chaos, the Romanovs became symbols once more. To monarchists, they were martyrs of Bolshevik cruelty. To nationalists, they were part of Russia's lost grandeur. To liberals, they were victims of tyranny from both throne and revolution alike. Their bones became battlegrounds of memory, argued over by politicians, priests and historians. In 1998, 80 years to the day after their execution, 5 of the family members were reburied in St. Petersburg's Peter and Paul Fortress, the traditional resting place of Russia's Tsars. The ceremony was somber, filled with Orthodox ritual. President Boris Yeltsin attended, admitting publicly that the Soviet state had committed a crime not only against a family but against history itself. Yet, even this act carried controversy. The Russian Orthodox Church, wary of the science and the politics, hesitated to recognize the remains as authentic. They stayed aloof from the funeral, leaving doubt hanging in the incense-filled air. It was not until the early 2000s that the Church canonized the Romanovs as passion-bearers, saints not because of political status but because they faced death with faith and resignation. Icons of Nicholas, Alexandra, and their children began to appear in churches across Russia. Pilgrims traveled to Ekaterinburg, where the Apatiev house once stood, now replaced by a gleaming cathedral, the church on the blood, its golden domes rising above the site of execution. Each year, processions of thousands marched through the city to the forest where the graves were found, chanting hymns in remembrance. The Romanovs, once erased, are now venerated. Outside Russia, their story continues to fascinate. Films, books, and plays retell it endlessly. Anastasia, though proven dead, remains the most enduring legend. Novels imagine her escape. Movies paint her as a lost princess rediscovered. The myth has become almost separate from the history, a fairy tale of survival that persists despite science. Alexei too is romanticized, the sickly boy who might have lived, whose hemophilia became part of his tragic mystique. For historians, however, the legacy is more sobering. The execution of July 1918 stands as a stark example of revolutionary violence, an act not only of war but of politics, intended to erase symbols as well as people. The secrecy, the lies, the decades of silence, all speak to the unease. Even the Bolsheviks felt at what they had done. It was not just a killing, it was the end of a dynasty, a deliberate severing of Russia from its imperial past, and yet, paradoxically, the attempt to erase gave birth to myth. Had the family been openly executed, with bodies displayed, history might have accepted their end plainly. Instead, the concealment, the rumours, the impostors, the silence, all created a legend that endured for nearly a century. In trying to bury them, the revolution ensured they would never be forgotten. Today, the Romanovs rest together. Their bones, once scattered, lie in consecrated ground. Visitors leave flowers, icons, candles. Their faces, once on coins and portraits of empire, now gaze from church frescoes and stained glass. They are no longer rulers, but symbols of faith, of innocence, of tragedy. For Russians, they embody the nation's turbulent passage through the 20th century, from autocracy to revolution, from silence to memory. And so the story closes not in the damp basement of the Apateyev house, nor in the dark pits of the forest, but in the quiet of a cathedral, where prayers rise softly and candles flicker. The empire is gone, the revolution faded, the Soviet Union itself collapsed. What remains are bones, memories, and the lessons of history, that power, once lost, can vanish overnight, and that even in death, the past refuses to stay buried. The night in Ekaterinburg, July 1918, will forever echo the rattle of rifles, the screams in the smoke, the silence afterward. But over a century later, the echo has softened, transformed by prayer, myth, and remembrance. The last Romanovs, once erased, have become eternal, and now, as our story draws to its close, the pace slows, like footsteps softening at the end of a long, uneven road. You can set aside the noise of rifles, the heavy boots, the voices arguing in smoky rooms. Imagine instead a quieter scene, candles glowing in a cathedral, their flames swaying gently, the air filled with the low murmur of prayer. The sharp edges of history blur, leaving behind only the shapes of faces, the outlines of a family who once lived and laughed and feared, as all families do. The Romanovs' last summer was filled with dread, yes, but also with small human gestures, embroidery passed from hand to hand, whispered jokes in the night, a father tending his son with care. These fragments remain, even when set against the violence of that July night. In remembering them, you carry not only the weight of tragedy, but the tenderness of a family holding together as their world collapsed. Close your eyes now, and let the harshness fade. Think of quiet forests at dawn, dew glistening on leaves, the air cool and still. Think of the river in St. Petersburg, reflecting the sky in long strokes of silver, its surface unbroken. History is full of storms, but it also offers moments of calm. Tonight we leave the Romanovs, not in blood and chaos, but in stillness, where prayers replace screams and memory becomes gentler than fact. So drift now into rest, carrying with you not the gunfire but the candlelight. The story has ended, but its echoes will remain soft in your thoughts, fading like whispers on the wind. Sleep well, knowing you have walked through history, and now you may set it down. Good night. For sweet dreams.